So this is my collection. For months now, I've been collecting random bits of plastic, electronics, anything that has an interesting shape, model kits, 3D printed parts, and just a bunch of junk. But all of this was in preparation for an art project that I'd like to do on kit bashing. But just to get my feet wet, I decided to do a dollar store trash bash kind of project in the vein of Bill making stuff and his DoodleBots. If you want to check that out, you should absolutely. Bill has a dry British sense of humor, but I'm sure you'll like it. I'll put links to his video on DoodleBots in the description below so you can check it out. Essentially, what a DoodleBot is taking a bunch of garbage, trashy pieces of plastic, and gluing them together to make a robot. And so that's what I'm going to endeavor to do today. Let's start with a bunch of stuff from the dollar store. These Easter eggs and these cauldrons that were for some pots of gold at the end of the rainbow for leprechauns. Anyway, this is everything I bought at the dollar store today, and we're going to try to make something out of it. So the first thing I'm going to do is take out some of these shapes and try to find something that I like, something that's pleasing. Kind of had some ideas, so I started sanding down all the surfaces because all these plastics are really garbage and you need to rough up the surface in order to get them to stick together, which later on you'll see is not as easy as it sounds. Next, I went to get some glue. I went with the Instacure Instaset combo that I got off Amazon. I also got some gel glue that didn't really work very well. This is aluminum armature wire that I wanted to use for the arms and legs, drilling holes so that I can feed the armature wire through, but I decided that I wanted to use something more rigid, so I went with a coat hanger. Just kind of bent it and shoved it through the bottom so that those are now my legs. But they were decidedly too flippity floppity and just did not hold anything up just by shoving them through and putting some crazy glue on it. So I took out some epoxy sculpt. This is that glue that was terrible. Don't use the glue that is the gel super glue from the dollar store. Just don't recommend it. So I put epoxy sculpt in the bottom of this, which later on would be the bane of my existence because it never cured and I'm too impatient. So now you can see I'm just gluing bits together, kind of going off the plan that I had put together before with the little pieces and gluing on what ultimately are going to be my shoulders for my robot here, my DoodleBot, and using that Instaset to cure the super glue instantaneously. And I just read the instructions to the epoxy sculpt and realized that it takes 24 hours to cure, and that was just not going to be acceptable, so I'll have to address that later on in this video. You'll see what happens. So now I'm just drilling through both sides of the model, the DoodleBot, to feed an armature wire all the way through. And it broke again, so now I'm gluing it again, and I went to the trick of using baking soda to reinforce the joints. Baking soda and the glue together make a stronger joint by giving it more surface area, I think. I don't know. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just following what Bill from Bill Making Stuff does. So anyway, that particular baking soda has been in my freezer for multiple years, so I'm assuming that it's used up its purpose in the freezer, so now it's a crafting supply. Now I'm just threading beads onto the arms here to make posable arms. And now I glued his head on here and just adding more and more glue and more baking soda and just making an absolute mess out of this because I didn't really plan to use the baking soda in the beginning, so just pouring it all over the mat. Now I'm adding more beads to flesh out the legs. And these are lights for if you're biking or something. I am tearing off the clips and I'm going to repurpose the clip to make like a toe. I did not break down these lights fully, which I should have just emptied the shells out. So in a moment here, which you can't really see on the video, I actually drill holes through it, and there's a little bit of smoke and a little bit of just sparks right where the battery was just cut straight through. So remarkably, one of them still worked, but we'll see what happens in the future as it corrodes and possibly starts a fire. I don't know. Now I'm making a claw, as Bill says on his channel, hands are hard, claws are easy. So I am drilled a hole through two directions of the bead so that I can feed armature wire through, and then drilled a hole in the back of it so that it'll fit onto the wrist of the arm. And I'm now cutting up little sections of the hose from the inside of a spray bottle to make the knuckles and fingers. So just kind of feed those on there, and once you get them all into place, put a little bit of glue on it, and you have some little claws. As you can see, I'm using the hose from the bottle of the Instaset rather than spraying it all over. I found that I could just drip it, pinpointed it right where I wanted it to go, and I saw this on Eric's Hobby Workshop. It seems to work really well. Now we're back to this epoxy sculpt. It never really cured fully, so I put some super glue on top of it and then sprayed it with the accelerator and didn't realize that it would actually kick the epoxy. So it got really hot really quick, but it set up solid almost instantly. It did shrink considerably and peel away, but it ended up working out fine, and that's pretty much the body build. He even has some posability within his waist, and the armature wire in his hands makes it really easy to pose both his hands and his arms. So now it's on to Gribbles. So I learned this from Bill on his channel. The great Greg Gribbles invented Gribbles, and his philosophy was that in model making, the more small stuff you glue to bigger stuff, the more interesting the bigger thing will look. He was a pioneer, and I think he worked for Industrial Light and Magic. I'll have to consult Bill on that. But anyway, on to Gribbles. So I'm just going through a box of random bits that I bought off of eBay, and a lot of it just said chrome model parts. There's some really cool little tiny bits in there. I probably paid way too much for it, but it doesn't matter. I decided that I wanted to make a backpack for this guy as part of the Gribbles process to give him some more detail. So right now I'm cutting the back out of a dental floss container so that it'll sit flush against his back because of the shape of the cauldron, now DoodleBot. So we're just giving that a quick sand on all the surfaces because it wasn't part of the original sanding process. And now I'm just going through and finding what bits fit where and how they go together. And this is all just kind of a random process of placing and moving and figuring out what you like and don't like, and then just committing to it. Start putting glue down and glue those bits on. Make Greg Gribbles proud. Now I don't know what this backpack does or what its purpose is, but I just wanted to give it some textures and shapes. So I found this tank that happened to fit right in the little curvature of where your thumb and index finger would pull the dental floss up from before you use the cutter. Now on the other side where the cutter would have been, I'm adding an antenna. I'm just doing a dry fit there, and it needs to trim some of the flashing or whatever you want to call it away so I back and glue it on, and it fits nice and flush against his back. I'm just taking some more little bits, different kinds of grills and things from model kits, and just adding some venting and different details to the surface of the body, and then the head as a little grill for like a sensor array or something, and a little eye, and a few more little things to finish off his head. And then I want to address these seams on his shoulders, so I'm using some EVA foam, and I am just cutting strips and gluing it around that shoulder socket to kind of cover up that unsightly gap. And this is the final result after Gribbles, and he is now ready to paint. First off, I start with an acrylic and cover the whole thing in black. Then I make a goop layer out of sand, Mod Podge, and a mix of paint. Way too much of it, but this gives it some grit and some texture. As you can see, the paint's rubbing off in places because I'm too impatient to wait for it to fully dry. I'm trying to get the whole thing done in one day, so it's just every time I handle it, I keep scraping more paint off, so I decided to coat the entire thing in Mod Podge to try and seal it using a heat gun to try and speed the process. Now I'm just adding a little bit of a rust layer into the seams and around the edges. This is just to add some dirt and grime and more texture to cover up the unsightly glue. Now as I go to paint, I'm making like an army green that I'm just stippling on and trying not to do such a thick coverage that I cover up all of the grime layers and the rust layers underneath. And then once I get that pretty well coated, I paint this bottom half of his torso in browns to try and make it look like rusty iron. Comes out pretty good, I have to say. I'm just adding some more colors and texture to the feet. Now, I was looking for silver paint, and I couldn't find any readily that wasn't too expensive, so I used silver nail polish, which ended up being cheap at the dollar store. It worked really great for little edges of like scratched paint off. So, and I'm applying it now to all the little grills and stuff to just kind of pop those details back up. Now I'm dry brushing it with a light brown tan to kind of add just a little bit of a dirt layer, kind of worn in the paint a little bit. This also pops all the highlights across the top of all that crust and everything that I added. I kept trying to fade this eyeball, but it just didn't really come out as clean as I'd like it to, but he's still pretty cool in the end. Now I'm using some rub and buff to just bring up the highlights and kind of add a bit of a bronze to certain parts of him, the little patch, his hands, and parts of the shoulders. And now I'm using weathering powder, which is just a crushed up chalk pastel. This adds like a rust layer that's on the surface. And then I'm just gonna go through and add a couple of acrylic washes to add some more just grime and grease that's built up on it, and just put it on and wipe it off. It's a watered down black paint basically. And now I just have some water slide decals. I picked out a good old number to put on them. There you go. He is done. Let's roll the beauty shots.
Well, folks, it's time to kick it old school.